I'm delighted to welcome Robert Burns, Director of Infrastructure and Climate Change, Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council. And Robert will be discussing sustainable mobility and climate proofing for our communities. Robert Burns.
Good morning, everyone. As Conor says, I'm Director of Infrastructure and Climate Change in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council. That's the local authority that's for this area. Sandyford is within that, so it is a locality I'm very familiar with. But I'm trying to keep the presentation will be at quite a high level. But a lot of what we're trying to achieve is actually about bringing what is more at the global down to the local level. And so I think we will zoom in and zoom out, if you like, throughout the presentation. That's just an overview of what I'm going to go through. So it's quite wide-ranging. We'll be looking at sustainable transport for sure, sustainable mobility, climate change, but also this idea of livability and quality of life, placemaking, which has become very, very much to the fore over the last number of years. So, just to give a sense of where I'm going to go to on this, for me, I think the most significant challenges we have, and indeed the opportunities, are to do with making our towns, villages and cities more livable. And that's making them more attractive to visit, more accessible, easier to move around, and more active in a social and economic sense. And that's very much in line with Town Centres First policy, which the government is advocating. We're also looking to facilitate and accelerate a shift in modes, getting people to use more sustainable modes. And we're also looking to create more climate resilient places and communities, and to support communities in their efforts to become more climate resilient. It's a very, very clear focus. We're apparently in a climate emergency, and are we acting accordingly? And I suppose that's just a rhetorical question. Just to open it out, because people sometimes think about, placemaking as a nice place to sit down, to go and have coffees and all the rest. But we need to think at this from a strategic perspective. And I'm quoting here the head of strategic policy at IDA. So these people know what they're talking about. They're talking about what will attract foreign direct investment. And it's very clear from their perspective that the creation of attractive places to live and work is not only good planning, but it's good enterprise policy. And it's important not only to be a great place to do business, but it's also in our interest to be known as a great place to live. And I spoke to an executive in the IDA on this, and they explained it to me in this way, that when companies are looking to come to a new location, be it in Ireland, let's say Dublin or Cork or Limerick, they'll probably send over their executives. And it's their executives that are thinking about whether they want to go there, whether they will bring their families there, if this is a good place for them to have their children grow up, to go to school, for their to have a good quality of life. So it isn't just about the work. We need to think about being a great place to live as well as a great place to work. So, sure, we get the idea of mobility. We all need to move around in different ways, and the more sustainable it is, the better. So that's good for our climate. So we understand that connection. More sustainable transport means better for our environment, less emissions, and so on. But then there's all this other stuff going over on the right-hand side, as I look at it, about livability. And that's really the intersection of people, space, and time. And the 15-minute city is completely about this. And that's the idea that you can access all the services you need, your place of employment, go to school, go to your shops within a short space. And so that will meet your physical, social, cultural, and economic needs. And if we get that piece right, if we get the compact development right, actually the mobility will be a lot easier. The easiest way to move around in a compact development is by walking and cycling. When we have extended journeys and very long trips to go to work or go to school, that's what really creates the challenge for us. How do we blend all of these? How do we meld all these together? It's mobility, it's climate, it's livability. And they're not mutually exclusive. I would argue that all three done right and done together is where we should be aiming. There's a wider policy context. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but we need to think about sustainability as using what we need now without compromising the needs of future generations. That's the essence of sustainability. A wider policy context, again, we have a lot of plans in place, a lot of national policies, a lot of local policies that are emphasising the need for sustainable transport and investment in sustainable transport, and indeed in climate action activities. Just to think about active travel, for example, everybody's probably aware that there's about 1 million per day being invested in walking and cycling infrastructure. That's really significant. And multiples of that have been invested in public transport systems. We're aware of legislation coming down the line for e-scooters, and the plan to have that should be almost 950,000 EVs on our roads by 2030. So that means 100,000 EVs every year between now and 2030. I'll leave that to everyone else to work out how feasible that is, given that we have 40,000 EVs on the road right now. Maybe the quickest win we have is to look to promote and enable walking and cycling, particularly for shorter trips. And again, there's a piece in a paper from a few weeks ago about how we were arguing about a few bike lanes and when we need to do a huge amount of activity. So we shouldn't lose the focus. We're here to try and carry out actions that will save the planet, literally save the planet. And if we get bogged down in a scheme here and a scheme there, we'll probably lose sight of the big picture. A lot of change happening as well in terms of climate action. It's a very dynamic, very fluid space. We had a major piece of legislation in the summer. We have a national climate action plan. We have carbon budgets. There'll be sectoral budgets, we're aware of that. And then there's also the concept of decarbonising zones, which will be a geographical zone where there'll be a certain limit on the carbon that's been produced in that area. And then we have connection between climate, environment and health. And I'm not going to go through that too much, but it's obviously better for our health if we are taking care of our environment. We do away or we reduce air pollution, for example. We get more exercise. And that's much more positive for us from a public health perspective. And the WHO has said that the single biggest environmental risk is in air pollution. 1,300 people die prematurely each year in Ireland because of air pollution. And a large part of that is to do with emissions from vehicles. So just to get a sense, when we talk about emissions, and just to bring it back to the local again, what's the sort of makeup of it? Like in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown, this is from 2014, I think, 44% was residential, 33% is transport. People mightn't have thought that residential is producing these emissions, but it is. It's how we heat our homes, it's the activities we do when we're at home, it's the water we use, it's heating and so on. And transport is about a third of that. If I showed this slide for Limerick or for Mayo, it probably would show a large proportion to do with agriculture. And I guess my point is here, everybody's saying, well, what is the council going to do about climate change? Well, what have I said to you? We're only responsible as a council for 1% of the emissions in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown, 1%. Social housing adds another 1.2%. So there's a whole host of other generators of emissions here. The council can do it at once. And think about all of the service that we provide. You're well aware of them, I'm sure. Street lighting, buildings, our fleet of vehicles, all the operations we carry out. And it's still only 1%. So there's a major body of work there. And so really, in my view, I think if we are serious about reducing emissions, it's going to require a deep collaboration between public and private sectors and society as a whole. Okay, so sustainable transport. It's bandied about as a term. What do we think it means? In my view, and this is tied in with the Design Manual for Urban Roads and Streets, which is government policy in this area, it's about prioritising the most sustainable mode. And there is a hierarchy. So at the top is pedestrians or people with disabilities, then cyclists, then public transport, and then private motor vehicles. So we're supposed to be designing our public spaces and our roads with that priority system in mind. That's in place since 2013. I would actually pose this question to people who are tuning in. Do you see that when you look out the window, when you go to work each day? Is that what you perceive to be the priority in terms of our public spaces? Probably not. But this is where we need to move towards, and this is what will happen. But, there are difficulties at the moment. actually implementing that. And then, that's complex enough. What if we add in the new modes? Where do e-scooters fit into this? Are they more sustainable than a bus or a train? Or I would argue they're less so than a walking and cycling, because that's generally under your own power. So they do have a place in this, and we need to work that out. Where do electric vehicles sit on this? I mean, it's still a vehicle. It still takes up the same space as a normal car, but it has a more efficient fueling mechanism. So they will still be better than private motor vehicles, but still not more sustainable than a bus or cycling or walking. So people who think that electric vehicles are the silver bullet, I think that is not the case. And if everybody thinks that electric vehicles are going to be the solution, we're going to have a major race for resources. It will cause social issues. It will cause issues in terms of mining in very vulnerable parts of the world. So we'll have to wait and see. But that is the sustainable transport hierarchy. That's what I'm working towards. That's what national and local policy is about. And it isn't about being against the car. It's actually just recognizing sustainable modes need their place. They need to be given the space as well. And it will be better for us all if as many people as possible can use sustainable modes. A modal shift is actually about the relative advantages between modes. I can't just say to someone, why don't you walk or cycle? Just don't bring the car. There has to be some advantage to doing that. So, for example, I don't ever drive into the city centre from Dún Laoghaire. I haven't, I think, in 3 or 4 years. Why? Because it takes too long, and I have nowhere to park when I get in there, or else I have to park, pay a lot for parking. So the relative advantage for public transport is clear. It's quicker and it's cheaper for me. And that's what we need to focus on. So there's the carrot and the stick there. Are there financial incentives we need to introduce more of them? I would argue, for example, for the e-cargo bikes, we don't have a national policy in place to support their use. It is in place in many other countries and jurisdictions around the world. So that financial help, that carrot would also help. But then there's demand management, things like congestion charges, restrictions on parking in city centres, low emission zones within our cities. These are the stick, if you like. So this is the other part that will encourage the modal shift. It isn't simply going to happen by saying, well, why don't you just cycle a bit more? It actually has to be made possible. And evidence-based planning, that's just a map showing the Greater Dublin Area Cycle Network. And the one on the bottom is actually the Sandyford area. So the areas in purple on that map is what we're working on in terms of building out the walking and cycling network in Sandyford, and we have a lot of really good plans in this area. But again, not to bring it too local, but the important point is that there is a plan here, there's a strategy, and we're working towards it. It's not just random bits of infrastructure we're putting in and hoping for the best. There's actually an evidence base, there's a strategic plan in place, and we try and build it out. And I cannot emphasize enough the need for safe, connected networks in whatever you're doing. There's no point. People who are advocating for the use of e-scooters, well, what network are you going to use? It'll be the cycling network you'll need. Almost certainly that's what the legislation is going to come out with. So whatever it is, you need a safe, connected network, and that's where we're going to find the difficulties, because that will mean reallocating space, existing road space. Important design principles here for any network, any mobility network. It needs to be cohesive, it needs to be direct, it needs to be safe, and it needs to be comfortable and attractive. So maybe just to look a little bit at this whole idea of cars, because I often wonder, are we understanding the car problem? Because people will say, well, we own too many cars. There's too many cars around. Indeed, there are many cars, and there's been an explosion in car ownership. Others will say, well, we're using the car too much, but if we used it less, we can own the car but use it less. So what is it? So again, maybe we'll look at the data and see what it tells us. We can see around now we have over 2.2 million or thereabouts, probably a little bit more if you add in all the different vehicles. But this is just in terms of private cars. About 2.8 million vehicles on our roads, but about 2.2 million cars. What would that be by 2030? And then we add in the electric vehicles. And we're not creating any more space. Our cities aren't really getting any bigger. We can't make the roads any bigger within it. So what's happening here? And remember, a lot of our cities are probably 1,000 years old, so they're medieval streets we're trying to put vehicles on. So in 20 years, the number of vehicles on our roads has doubled. And that's tied to population growth, economic growth, and so on. So not that unusual. It's a significant factor. And I think, any of us that probably are a little bit more mature can remember a time, maybe in the 80s, early 90s, when it was relatively safe to walk and cycle on our roads. I grew up in the country. I cycled to school up until I was 12 or 13, and it was fine. I think right now, in that same country area, I would be very reluctant to have children cycle on it at all. So something has very changed dramatically. More vehicles, higher speeds, larger vehicles on our roads. But then we look at our car ownership rate compared to other European countries. And then we see, well, we're not really even in the top bracket. And we have all of these exemplars like Denmark and the Netherlands have higher car ownership rates and increasing. So it's not about ownership of cars, it's not about the number of cars. What it's about, I contend, is the use of cars. And a specific issue that we have in that cars are now the predominant mode for short journeys, 2 kilometers or less. And what we can see is through CSO statistics is that the use of car for short trips is actually increasing over the last number of years. And what's even more worrying is that walking as a mode is decreasing. And there is a correlation. So that red arrow, that red line is showing an increase in car use for 2 kilometers. Remember, 2 kilometers is a distance you can walk in about 20, 25 minutes, and you can cycle in about 10 minutes. So that's a very achievable distance for people who are able to move around in that way. And walking, as I said, has gone down. That should be going the opposite way. And that's what we need to address. Not taking cars out. People can own their cars and have their cars. They can sit in their driveway for a month. It's what they're using them for. And those short journeys is where we really need to look at our attention. People will still use their cars to go to long distances for the weekends or for commutes, whatever. But if we can get more and more people out of the cars for the short journeys and the urban spaces, that frees up more road space for everybody else. And just a little bit on urban design, some interesting quotes there. These people are very eminent people. I mean, they've done it in New York and in Denmark. Jan Gehl would be sort of, I guess, the father of the public realm, if you like. And a lot of people would look to Denmark and Copenhagen as to what they're doing with their public realm. And I think my net point here is that we need to have a strategy. We work from the whole to the part. Again, people who may be familiar with local government administration, there's a county development plan, there's a city development plan. Within that, there is a local area plan or an urban framework plan, for example. Dún Laoghaire has one, but so has Sandyford as a district. And we work within that. And then you have programs and projects that are generated from that. For example, our pedestrianisation within Dún Laoghaire in the summertime was actually very much part of an overall strategy. It didn't happen randomly. Sure, COVID was there and it was an opportunity, but it was a great chance for us to trial something. We were all focused on summer streets, outdoor summer, all of that kind of thing. And indeed, based on the news yesterday, outdoors is going to be still very much part of our lives, and maybe for months, years to come. Our coastal mobility route, that's between Blackrock and Sandy Cove. It's a project we put in place during COVID last year. Again, very high numbers of people using, and I think it shows the potential for active travel. It has really been a phenomenal success. I mean, 2 million active travel journeys on that route in just 1 year. A wide range of people using it, older people, children, and so on. And, everybody talks about the Waterford Greenway, the Mayo Greenway. They're only at a very small fraction of the numbers that we're getting along the coast. It shows you the potential for urban active travel. And within that, the reason those numbers are so high is not tourists, it's not leisure people, leisure cyclists or whatever. It's actually people going to work, going to school, going for appointments. They're using it for their day-to-day journeys. It helps, it's in a very pretty part of the country, lovely coastline there, nice towns and villages, but it has that mix. And we see high use at the weekends, but high use during school times as well. Just some photos there showing the range. And I guess this probably gets to the nub of it for me, what I'm going to show you next. That's just a photo of that area before we did any work along the coast. Just a random sort of indented area where cars were parked up. Wasn't even a parking control area. And this is what we transformed it into, and it's something we're quite happy with. I'm quite proud of what we were able to do. It was an active travel route, but we also made it a little pocket park, a place where people could stop and rest and enjoy that beautiful bay, view of Scotland's Bay and looking over towards Howth. I think that's a much better use of that space than what it was used for before. Again, a lot may be going on this slide, but I think the net point here is that congestion is costing us money. You know, leave aside electric vehicles, internal combustion engine, whatever it is, it's still the size of a car. That is not going to solve our congestion problem. Dublin is a highly congested city, the sixth most congested city in Europe. I think on average, it's 480 hours per year people are spending in their car. And it's costing us. It's costing us a lot of money. In 2017, it cost us 350 million. In 2033, about 2 billion. So doing nothing is costing us money. And that's why you see a lot of focus now on demand management, on the idea of congestion charges, on the idea of low emission zones. It's to do with this. Our economy is going to be strangled if we don't get a handle on congestion. Allied to that is the need to carry out significant work to adapt our environment for climate change. And that's estimated to cost 800 million a year. That may only be just a shot in the dark. It's probably billions. And if there's a catastrophic climate-related event like flooding, then what will the cost of that be? So we probably will pay for it one way or the other. Either we do the work to adapt to the climate change, or we take what's coming. And mobility in the public realm, again, tying back to what the IDA was saying, is actually not only is it a more attractive place for strategic international investment, it's actually better for retail as well. So investment in the public realm and walking and cycling has been shown through research to result in a 30% increase in retail sales. Because it's encouraging more people to come and visit. They come and visit more often. They spend less when they come, but they visit more often to the high street. And there's other benefits as well. And I think the people like Sandyford Bid would be very interested to know that retail vacancy is reduced because of improvements in the public realm. And we know about vacancy rates on our high streets or in our towns and villages. So this is something that can help with that. And actually, from a local authority's point of view, it's one of the areas where we can focus on. It's something that a local authority can do. It can improve the roads and streets. It can improve the public realm. It can't probably deal with the vacancy directly, but this is something that will help in a very strong indirect way. And innovation and research and evaluation, given that this is innovation related webinar, just thought I'd touch on some of the areas. And what I want to get across here is the idea of collaboration. We're not doing stuff on our own in Dún Laoghaire County Council. We're working with other partners, be it Smart Sandyford, Trinity, TU Dublin. Playful City is a social enterprise, a really great organisation that we're working on a public realm project called Love Our Laneways, where we're just trying to revamp old forlorn laneways and make them something more vibrant, more green. And then, we have the initiatives, for example, the e-cargo bikes, the inclusive cycles. I think Hugh went through the scheme that we have with them. So we're always looking for partners. And indeed, we work very closely with Sandyford Bid on a lot of things. And Smart Sandyford is actually a connection between Sandyford Bid and Dún Laoghaire as well. But research requires investment and collaboration. It's something we haven't been that good at in Ireland. We need to get better at it. The decisions we make are so essential, they're so fundamental, they need to be based on research. We cannot be doing it on anecdotes. Just Blackrock Village, any of you are from the area might be familiar with changes we did there. We made it one way for vehicles and put in new cycling facilities, new improvements in the public realm. And I guess my point is we commissioned TU Dublin to carry out a very extensive research project on the changes and the impact of those changes. And we just produced that report, or TU Dublin published that report last week. Very interesting findings, showing massive support within the business community for the changes and for making it permanent. And again, this is really important for us and for any town or village that's looking to do this. We now have a platform to go ahead and say, well, maybe we're going to make those changes permanent. We can have that conversation. And people say, yeah, well, I don't like it, or most people don't like it, those shops. Well, we say, here's the report. We did an extensive survey looked at the data, this is what it's saying. You know, and I think we're in a much stronger position, and that's better in terms of bringing people with you. You know, you've done this, you've asked them for their views, and it's about the collaboration. And BlackRock is a really interesting project for us because we worked very, very closely with the business network there and the residents association, and it was very much a collaboration. It still is to this day, and we're still in contact. And I think that there's a lesson there, and definitely a strong lesson for us in the local authority. And what I'd say is third level institutions, we're very fortunate again in this area. We have some very eminent institutions, UCD, IADT, we're working with them on their various projects. We actually were involved with WeCon project with Francesco Pila, Citizen Science Project. You know, a lot happening there. And my sense of it is that the academics, the third level institutions really want to engage, and they have an awful lot to offer, and they have a lot of funding as well. So I think if you're involved in these kind of projects, whatever it might be, reach out to them. They probably will be able to help, and they will help with that evidence or the evaluation side of things. And I won't spend too much time on this, but I guess just to emphasize the point, it was a collaboration, or is a collaboration. And what we're trying to do is to trial it. The evaluation is a really strong part of this. So we have Trinity working with us and Enable and Smart Sandyford to work out what's working. So e-cargo bikes might work very well in Birmingham or Utrecht or Copenhagen, but they may not work as well here, and there may be reasons for that. And we need to understand that, and that's the reason we're doing the evaluation. And truth be told, I mean, the reason I probably started this initiative with Bleeper was I wanted to move that conversation on nationally and say, well, look, we need a national support scheme. At the moment, DLR is supporting this with the help of the NTA, but I think there should be a national support scheme for e-cargo bikes to help businesses to make that transition, indeed for families to make that transition. I mean, we're talking about modal shift, and I was talking about what will prod that or prompt that. Actually, you know, a financial contribution of something like maybe €1,000, €1,500 for an e-cargo bike might be enough to nudge people away from using maybe the second car or from buying a van or whatever. And these are the small things, or seem like small things, small changes we need to make. Again, just looking at this and tying back to the climate change, we're going to be issuing certificates on the carbon footprint or the impact of the carbon footprint to all of our customers on that trial, the 20 or so that are on it, to tell them what they've contributed in terms of reduction in carbon emissions, the distance they've cycled, indeed the air pollution that has been reduced by their actions. And we think that's actually a nice touch just to show what they can achieve. And it all adds up. And again, thinking global and acting local, you know, we pride ourselves in Dunleary Down on our parks and our public spaces. And I think I won't take the credit for our parks department do all that great work. And one of our most recent parks is a pocket park on Blackthorn Park in Sandyford, just down the road. And the reason I wanted to bring up, it's a lovely space, and I think people who live or work here will get to go out, enjoy that space. There's a playground there, it's close to the playing pitches, it's close to the workplace, it's close to public transport. But our Parks Department actually commissioned a report to look at the climate impact of that. And that's just what I want to focus on. There's 6,000 trees in there. They provide 2.5 hectares of tree cover. They store 36 tonnes of carbon per year. They sequester 6 tonnes and 30 kilograms of air pollution. That mightn't seem like much, but this is those little particles, the particulate matter gets into your lungs and causes very serious health issues. They're taking that in. So trees are sort of a magic device, if you like. You couldn't invent something that's so good in terms of reducing oxygen, taking in carbon, reducing air pollution, cooling down areas, helping with flood management and so on. And it produces 16 tonnes of oxygen per year. And that's only in a small little park. I think it's important to remember what purpose and what benefit parks can offer. We know about the obvious thing about a place to exercise and play, but they're having this significant climate impact. And this is part of climate proofing our communities. And we have a climate action plan, very specific targets, for example, in biodiversity, and which will include tree planting. So again, it's not an accident that we're doing this. This is part of an overall plan. And again, thinking global, acting local, and again, bringing back to local, I have to commend Sandyford Bid for the work that they do. They show great leadership. I know they had a plebiscite recently and they have another term. And the business improvement districts are a really important partner for us in Dún Laoghaire Down County Council. And we've worked on a number of initiatives. Up there on the screen you can see the public realm and changes that were made. That was done in partnership with Sandy Forbid and a private architect. Lovely little spaces for people to go out and enjoy that were good for COVID and will be good past COVID. Sandy Forbid is showing leadership itself. They have joined our scheme, the e-cargo bike scheme. You probably saw it out front. Again, these are small steps, but it's important and it sends a signal. We work very closely with Smart Sandyford, which is a part of the bid, and there's a partnership there. And like one of the things I was really happy to see is when they were marketing and advertising this event, and there was a prize for registration, they chose an e-bike. They could have chose anything, a weekend away, a flight or something, but it sent a signal and it shows where the thinking is at. And for me, that has sent a very strong signal to people who might attend this conference, saying this organisation is very much focused on sustainable transport, on climate change, and making those changes and setting a good example. Again, a lot of busy stuff going there, but I've highlighted in red, and I suppose this is the engineer in me that has to write everything out, so my apologies if there's too much going on there. So we need to plan strategically. We need leadership is the key challenge. We'll never achieve consensus, so I don't think I can wait around and say, well, let's wait until everybody agrees that we build these cycle lanes or new footpaths. We're not going to get there. We need to move ahead. We can try and bring people along with us, but never get 100% consensus. And we need to communicate on the co-benefits. It isn't just about sustainable transit. It's about better air quality. It's about being better for our health, less noise, less disruption from flooding, those longer term benefits that will come. And again, this whole space is very much evolving. It's very fluid. There'll be new legislation coming out, decarbonising zones, the budgets and all of that. We'll see how they work. And again, bringing it back to the local, it's one of my favourite pieces of intervention that we've done here. Again, it's in Blacktown Park, and it isn't all about doing the practical things. What makes I suppose, this county and Ireland a very livable place are these small touches. Something that makes it attractive, something that brings out that creativity, that draws us to these public spaces. That was a very forlorn-looking grey wall, but it has been transformed, and it actually has a very positive effect on the park itself and on the community. So I'll leave it at that. I'd like to thank everybody for your attention today.
Thank you to Robert Burns, Director of Infrastructure and Climate Change, Dún Laoghaire Down County Council. One thing is for certain is the debate around future-proofing our communities is going to continue. And the other thing that's certain is there's going to be change, and big change, and we need to embrace change to make improvements in our emissions and create a better lifestyle for ourselves and our children.